friends, I am Vitaly Portnikov. Just a few days after it became known that US President Joe Biden allowed Ukraine to use American-made long-range missiles to strike what is called the sovereign territory of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin signed a decree approving the foundations of state policy in the field of nuclear deterrence. Putin announced possible changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine last summer. However, it is absolutely clear that the signing of the decree right after Ukraine finally received permission for strikes on the sovereign territory of the Russian Federation is yet another important moment for nuclear blackmail of Western countries by the Russian Federation. It is worth noting that this nuclear doctrine includes a point directly related to the current Russian-Ukrainian war and the assistance of Western countries to Ukraine. It is stated that Russia may respond to aggression from any non-nuclear state with the involvement or support of a nuclear state. Of course, this refers to the fact that Western countries are currently firmly denying their involvement in the Russian-Ukrainian war, and they emphasize that they are exclusively helping Ukraine in our resistance to Russian aggression. But no, Putin seems to be telling them, we consider you participants in the conflict precisely because you are helping Ukraine in the war against the Russian Federation. And at any moment, your involvement in this war may be reclassified by us as direct aggression against the Russian Federation. And this, essentially, is the essence of the changes that exist in the modern nuclear doctrine. Also, a response to the conditions of the current war is the assertion that nuclear deterrence can be applied when a potential adversary deploys air defense systems, medium and shorter range missiles, high-precision non-nuclear weapons, and strike drones. It can be said that any fact in the war with the Russian Federation may be perceived by its military and political leadership as a reason to use nuclear weapons against the enemy. After all, we know very well how many cases have already occurred that could formally correspond to the application of the nuclear doctrine of the Russian Federation. But there are still many questions that remain unanswered even after Vladimir Putin signed this document. One of these questions is, what exactly is considered the territory of the Russian Federation by Putin and his entourage? After all, the current reaction of the Russian leadership in the form of changes to the nuclear doctrine is precisely related to the permission to strike sovereign territory of the Russian Federation. Sovereignty from the perspective of the West and from the perspective of the Russian Federation, all the territory that is recorded in the Russian Constitution is sovereign. That is, Vladimir Putin, the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, and the citizens of Russia should have no doubt that the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia regions of the Russian Federation, according to the Constitution. The Autonomous Republic of Crimea, which is also declared a subject of the Russian Federation, along with occupied Sevastopol, all of this is Russia, not Ukraine. But the armed forces of Ukraine have repeatedly struck, including with Western-made missiles, at these territories. It is worth reminding at least about the situation such as the missile strike on Sevastopol, and then the question arises, how Moscow will characterize the actions of Ukraine or any other country against the Russian Federation when the sovereign territory of the Russian Federation itself does not appear to be confirmed. There is Russian territory from the perspective of international law. And in this situation, allowing Ukraine's allies to use their missile weapons for strikes on occupied territory is quite logical. The territory of Russia from the perspective of Russian constitutional law. And in this situation, Russians should react to strikes on Crimea or Donbas in the same way as to strikes on the Kursk region of the Russian Federation or other Russian regions, the belonging of which to Russia is not questioned by anyone. Territories that are actually done under the control of the Russian Federation and those that Russia considers its own according to the changes in its own constitution. I mean those parts of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions of Ukraine that are currently not under the control of the Russian Federation, and the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the territories that President Putin continues to seek as a condition for negotiations between Russia and Ukraine to end the war. How will Moscow characterize the aggression of any other state against itself when it cannot even determine its own perception of its sovereign territory? And this is not just a question that should demonstrate to us the entire deceitfulness of Russian propaganda. This is a question that reminds us that Putin himself has fallen into so many political traps that it is impossible to escape from them with a sound mind. And perhaps this explains why the Russian leader has ultimately lost his sanity. So now in the West, there will only be speculation about whether this is real nuclear propaganda blackmail from the Russian Federation, or if it is a real decision by the Russian president at some point to use nuclear weapons, and Putin's search for reasons to use such nuclear weapons, but against whom? Against Ukraine, or against this nuclear state that has given Ukraine the ability to launch missiles of its own production, the sovereign territory of the Russian Federation. In other words, it is about whether Vladimir Putin is really ready for a real conflict with NATO member countries. There are no realistic answers to all these questions. But it is absolutely clear that this nuclear blackmail, which was initiated by Putin, not by chance right now, will be used by the Russian leadership in the first, I would say, phone conversations, in the first contacts with the newly elected US President Donald Trump. That Trump had no doubts that if he did not concede to Putin, it would not be about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, but about a real nuclear war, which, as we understand, Trump and his entourage do not want to deal with at all. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it, subscribe to my social media, to the channels on Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and Donatello, which help develop these resources. Use the sponsorship feature on YouTube itself. Wishing you victories and peace. Good luck.